Good morning, my friends. Derek from Bomb Socks here with more Bomb Bites, feasting upon the words of Christ, one bite at a time. So this week we're doing 3 Nephi 20 through 26, which these chapters are pretty dang intense. And I don't mean intense by way of storyline. I mean intense as far as doctrine. Like there's some meat here that is absolutely crazy. And you could really get into this. And like I've spent the last little bit just trying to study this out. And there's a lot going on in these chapters. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this one bite at a time. So as we do this, I want to first of all ask you the question. I think this will help you out. How many of you have had an opportunity to have a book recommended to you? And if you have, the question is, how important is the recommender to your willingness to be able to read the book that's been recommended? Well, with that in mind, go to chapter 23 of 3 Nephi. So we're going to kind of start right in the middle of these chapters, and then I'm going to branch off other directions with this. So in chapter 23, you have Jesus who, verse number 1, says, "Now behold, I say unto you," this is Jesus, "that ye ought to search these things." So it almost starts off as kind of that'd be a great idea to do this. "Yea," and then it all of a sudden escalates, "a commandment I give unto you, that ye search these things diligently. For," and these are the words that strike fear into the hearts of most members of the church, "for great are the words of Isaiah." You see that phrase and all of a sudden the panic button goes off and you see Isaiah and you think about every single time you read the Book of Mormon, you're cruising along in 1 Nephi and it's great. You're reading about this family that leaves Jerusalem. They go back and get plates and they go back and get wives and there's a dream and the brothers don't treat each other very good and one of them's really obedient and all of a sudden, it's cruising along and all of a sudden you hit this major wall in your reading of the Book of Mormon, which is right towards the end of 1 Nephi, and then you start getting into about the 2 Nephi 7 and 8, and then there's this lengthy chunk from about 2 Nephi 12 to about 25 or so, which is labeled Isaiah. And we see those things, and most of us call it like the Isaiah mountain or the Isaiah wall, and a lot of times we just hit it, and we don't quite know what to do with it. And so we either stop right there or we go around it or we very, very surfacely just kind of skim through it. And we see a few words we recognize and that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when Jesus says the words, ye ought to search these things. In fact, he says it's a commandment. It's not even ye ought to anymore. "A commandment I give unto you, that ye search these things diligently." Personally, I absolutely love Isaiah. I love what he teaches. I love what he stands for. To me, he is the easiest Old Testament prophet to understand. There's a lot harder one. Have you read Leviticus lately? Which is another book of mine that I love. Anyway, I love Isaiah. I've taken time to study over the years the words of Isaiah, because I know every single time I read the Book of Mormon, I am going to come across Isaiah. Nephi loved Isaiah. I think Nephi felt the way about Isaiah the way we feel about Joseph Smith. And so constantly, he's quoting Isaiah. And so that to me tells me something that I ought to really take some time to understand Isaiah. Now, the interesting thing about Isaiah is he's an Old Testament prophet that's being put into the Book of Mormon, but the Book of Mormon is an Old Testament book. They're not too far away removed from Isaiah. And so if you really want to understand the words of Isaiah, I could do a whole big, how to understand Isaiah lesson, and that's not necessarily the purpose for today. I do want to do that when we actually get to those Book of Mormon chapters in 4 years, when we continue to do these bomb bites, in which that's the plan, to do the Doctrine and Covenants next year, to do the Old Testament next year, the New Testament, and then we're going to finish up with probably in the 2 Nephi range, because we started episode 1 of the bomb bites with Jacob chapter 1. So that's my goal, is to run the cycle all the way through. So in order to really understand Isaiah, you've got to understand the concept of the house of Israel. And you got to also understand the Gentiles. Basically, you're going with, for lack of a better term, the members of the church versus non-members of the church. That's basically the way we can look at that there. You got the Israelites and the non-Israelites and their relationship to God. So President Nelson in conference said this very phrase. He said, "For more than 36 years, I've been an apostle. The doctrine of the gathering of Israel has captured my attention. Everything about it has intrigued me, including the ministries and names of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their lives and their wives, the covenant God made with them and extended through their lineage, the dispersion of the 12 tribes, and the numerous prophecies about the gathering on our day. Now, if you've ever taken the time to really read a conference talk from President Nelson, one of the things I would absolutely recommend is you look at the footnotes. The footnotes in and of themselves are another talk. In fact, just try this for a minute. When you look at President Nelson's talk, just click on the footnote and just look at the sidebar right here. Look at this stuff that's in here. There's some amazing things. This very first statement that he says, I have spoken of Israel in at least 378 of the more than 800 messages I have delivered during my 36 years as an apostle. So here's President Nelson being very specific. The concept of Israel fascinates him. And honestly, the concept of Israel fascinated Nephi because he was part of the house of Israel. And really, it should fascinate us because raise your hand if you're of the house of Israel. Okay, you guys are all out there hopefully raising your hand, particularly if you've received a patriarchal blessing. You've been told that you are of a certain lineage of the house of Israel. Israel should mean something to us. It really should. And it means something to Nephi. It means something to President Nelson. The scattering and the gathering is important to understand. And Isaiah really focuses a lot on the covenants that God made with Israel and with the Gentile nations. So with all of that in mind, tomorrow we're going to delve right into chapter 20 and 21, and you're going to see the importance of this idea of the covenant and what it really should mean to us. So anyway, I hope that helps you guys out. It doesn't confuse you a whole lot. Trust me, we're going to keep this as simple as we can and to help you really understand this to the point where when you get to these chapters that start talking about Isaiah, you're not scared of them, and you can be able to climb this Isaiah mountain and be able to enjoy the views, because this week should give you some wonderful views of how God views his children and the covenants that he has made with the house of Israel. You guys are great. Godspeed, and we'll see you tomorrow on the mountain. Bye-bye.